for me, it seems since it's moved away from the Southern 500, which I get, you want to focus on the playoffs. It just seems like I don't know if it's something about Fox or just the timing or what. It just seems like it has been a bit flat. Now, we see the fans are turning out to Darlington, so good fan turnout there. We see the history on display. Some great cars before they get the Darlington stripe, but kind of starting with you. Do you believe the throwback weekend energy is running low and should be brought back for 2026, or what should be the future of the throwback weekend?
Well, it's definitely running low amongst some of the drivers, and I kind of get that. I think that what made the initial throwback weekend such a big hit was that it was kind of unplanned. It wasn't like an edict sent down from the sport or anything like that. It was just something to do because the Southern 500 had finally moved back to its proper date at the Labor Day weekend. So, with that in mind, I think that for me, the throwbacks in the Cup Series have kind of lost their way a little bit for the most part. I think many of them, as we kind of went through on our pre race show this week, I think some of them are still very strong and still show a lot of inspiration and even ingenuity in some cases. And obviously, when you look down at the Xfinity series, they do a great job remaining faithful with, even their smaller sponsors and stuff like that are a little bit more willing to bend their branding guidelines. But I think what's wearing everything down is like these just half effort throwbacks like Chase Elliott's, where it's like if you look at it close enough with a picture of the other car that it's based on, you can kind of maybe see it. But because these brands are too clung to their guidelines and their brand colors, they are just a little bit too stuck in the mud and a little too rigid for this kind of a concept to really work all the time. And it's really funny for me because Universe was very willing last April to slap that ruby red all over the car for the 9 at Martinsville for the 40th anniversary. They had no problem doing that. But when it came to having a throwback where they needed to change their teal to a darker green, that was where they had an issue. So I did find all that interesting. I found some of the drivers' comments about this weekend pretty interesting, but I just think that this is the 11th consecutive year that we've done it. I think we may need to just take a break from it for a couple of years. And I don't think that this race is going to lose any of its impact. It's still Darlington. It's still a great race more often than not. I wouldn't say today's was great by any stretch, but yeah, it's just something that we all have kind of come to expect. And then we're kind of running out of ideas and running out of ingenuity, it seems, from the sponsorship standpoint. So maybe if we took a little bit of a break, give us a little bit of space from it, brought it back for, say, Rockingham, if it were to come back, North Wilkesboro, if it ever got a points race. If we brought it back for either of those, I think it would come back and be a big hit yet again. But yeah, right now it's kind of feeling a little stale, even though some of the throwback concepts, especially in the Xfinity series, are still just as good as we had in year one.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's tough. I think it is running its course and the energy's running low. But at the same time, I think it's great for the sport. And I'd argue against a lot of these companies marketing their products or their name branding. I think the idea, especially for an older fan base, if you really want to get your branding more notice, I think you adhere to a throwback. I really do. Like, sure, Kyle Larson's Hendrick Cars scheme that he runs every single week, obviously down to Ricky Hendrick. And it's funny, the CW broadcast actually put Chase Elliott's scheme as a Ricky Hendrick throwback. I don't know if you guys caught that on Saturday, but it said, yeah, running it on Ricky Hendrick. And I was like, that's his Xfinity number 17 car. I thought that was interesting. But it's like the energy is running low. I think we can all agree on that. And it sucks when you see either half the cars or maybe only a little over half participate. It's just, it kind of sucks. I mean, I think there's so many solutions to it, to be honest with you. I think you can go a number of ways, whether it's, I know NASCAR, gosh forbid they would do this, maybe offer a little bit of an incentive. If you participate, you get a cash bonus or something like that, or have a vote where whatever team wins the Darlington Throwback gets a money bonus, something like that to actually encourage these teams. But I'd argue at the same time too, having it this early in the season is you are not giving the designers enough time, I truly believe, because you have 7 weeks before this. They're focused on the 7 weeks before this. Sometimes you do it really early in the year, like ahead of time, but other time you got guys scrambling trying to figure out what they're going to do. If you pushed it to a later race or maybe even the Southern 500, but I would like, say, at the All-Star race, say if you go back to Rockingham and at the Cup level, do it there. Do it at a North Wilkesboro. Darlington's great. It's historic, but maybe it is running its course there. But I think one thing that keeps the energy up is bringing back a lot of these veteran guys that you see, whether it was Carl Edwards, obviously, earlier, and then you had Mike Skinner. You had guys like Ron Hornaday mentioned his Team Hornaday development program, guys talking about their love and stuff for the sport and still being able to maybe not see their exact schemes out there, but at the same time just saying, oh, it's pretty cool, It's like there's a lot of them maybe aren't in the public eye as much with NASCAR because it's a totally different sport than it was when they were behind the wheel. But to see them go out there, whether it's mandatory for the Hall of Fame, I can't comment on that. But at the same time, just to bring that energy, bring those veterans back there to show that this is actually, it could be a great thing from a marketing standpoint. And I think social media, NASCAR social media has really picked up their pace, what they've been able to do. The graphics look amazing. The videos, editing, out of this world. And you can do a lot of marketing campaign with Darlington or with the Throwback. I argue too that I don't think they give the designers enough time and the sponsors enough time to figure out, hey, instead of our generic scheme, we run 18 races out of the year, we're going to completely mix it up. I wouldn't say they run out of ideas either. I think you could technically run a Throwback for anything. The amount of drivers that have raced in the NASCAR, any 3 series, the amount of won in any 3 series, I think there's unlimited opportunities. And I know it's been 11 years. We've seen the same schemes like the Sterling Marlin, what was on Alfredo's car. Technically, you could argue that was Jamie McMurray. But, still, it's like that's the best, one of the best looking schemes out there. I know Landon Castle ran it back in like 2019, I believe it was. I don't know if a Quinn Houff ran it too, the doubles arrow, one of those two guys. But it's like they look great, and the branding because of whatever was on that car, just because it looked like an old car someone might have liked 20 years ago. But yeah, that's my end for the point. I think it's running low. They got to do something, whether it's offer an incentive. I don't think making it mandatory is ethical unless you do it at like an all-star race where not everyone's really going to be in there, or maybe the Clash, just something to get the fans excited.
I would say overall, it seems like if the excitement is at the track, which you can't really feel on the TV, great. But I feel the presentation, NBC, when they had the Surf 500, you saw the ads. It's Throwback Weekend, the vintage NBC ads. They brought back then Ken Squire, Jarrett. I really felt like they made a big event where, I don't know, it's just because maybe I don't watch Fox as much or what, but I just don't get that sense like we're seeing this big of a build-up. I overall think, the other thing too, for me at least, still having the car number so far forward, hard to make it work on a lot of the throwback schemes. I would love to see if the RTA NASCAR's like, this is the one race the car numbers could be moved to the door. I think that would really just help some of these cars look good again, because Kyle Larson's car, the last 2 years with that number 5, he seemed to make that work, but there's this other paint schemes where it's like, just doesn't seem to work.
What do you think about the current state of Throwback Weekend? We're seeing less participation, at least on the Cup side of things as well. But then again, some of the Xfinity teams are really still going all in on this weekend. Do you think it's getting stale as it run its course, or do you like the tradition and think that, it's still as strong as ever?
It becomes a perennial idea or a perennial argument. Every time we come back to Throwback Weekend, it always gets shouted out there into the ether. Is this thing running its course? Is it getting old? And we were saying the same thing last year, the year before that. I don't know. And every year I'm consistently amazed by how many stories we're able to write about these new uh, pieces of history that are being shared through not just the NASCAR landscape, but I mean also through just motorsports, American motorsports history in general. We had two IndyCar throwbacks today, or in this past weekend between Cup and Xfinity. You had the throwback for Bobby Unser from Nick Sanchez in the 48 for Big Machine. And then in the Cup Series, you had the Jim Clark 1965 Lotus rear engine throwback from the Indianapolis 500 on Josh Berry's 21. Unfortunately, that was a short end to that one. Hopefully it comes back for the Brickyard 400. Heard some talks about that, but yeah, I think some of these teams are really good at doing this still, and I think also to be considered is that this is not for the teams and the drivers; it's for the fans, and the fans still overwhelmingly on Twitter polls seem to indicate that yes, this is what we want, and this is what we want to continue. And I think there's a lot of potential for it to keep moving in a good direction and staying creative, and also it's not just for the older fans that really enjoy it. I think there's something to be said about the impact it has on younger fans and ones that are seeing their very first race or in their very first year of watching races. They see a car they think is interesting. Well, what's the story behind that? All these cars, all these paint schemes have stories behind them and typically legends behind them too. And so I think there's a lot to be said about keeping this tradition moving. And yes, you're going to have repeats. That's obvious. You're going to run out eventually. But at the same time, who cares? These things need to keep coming up and keep being reminded to the fans of where your history came from. And if we have repeats, so be it. Those are the favorites. But I'm consistently impressed by, especially in the Xfinity series on Saturday. And this was actually my first time ever to witness throwbacks in person as a fan. And I'm really glad we got to enjoy that. Got to enjoy that with my wife on Saturday. But just consistently impressed by all the great throwbacks in the Xfinity paddock. Had a really great turnout, like you said. There was some of the ones that quote unquote ruined the fun in the Cup Series side, but no, I think you're going to have a really sour taste in your mouth and also like a be careful what you wish for kind of outcome if you say get rid of it. We don't need that. And again, teams don't need to be required to do it. That's fine. If there's teams that don't want to do it, that's okay. I'm not mandating it.
This is a rare moment. I think we might actually have a moment of disagreement here between the two of us because okay. I think that we're just at a point where, and I remember this take being put out there in 2015, before the first ever Darlington race that did this. People were saying,
right,
let's not make this an annual event. It's fun that we're doing this. We have a new TV partner in NBC that's going to come in and be a part of it as well. And the race is finally returning to the date that it always should have been, Labor Day weekend. So we're having some fun with it this year. But if you turn it into an annual event, you're going to run out of throwback schemes that everybody knows and loves. You're going to run out of ideas. And I think one of my friends in a group chat I'm in put it perfectly this weekend here. If you're throwing it back to Ryan Reed, I mean, no disrespect to Ryan Reed, but I think that just kind of, in a nutshell, shows that we've used up all the good schemes multiple times now. People seem to be running out of ideas here. I like the idea that, and again, this would get into kind of like mandatory participation or whatever, or putting designers in a box. So I get that those would probably be the counter arguments to it. But some people said, let's have a theme. You have to pick something from the 90s, or you have to pick something that, is from a certain era that we're going to celebrate this year. And then the next year we can switch it up and go back a decade or something a little bit more recent, like 2000s again. I mean, if you're throwing it back to something within the last decade, like I know William Sawalich threw it back to Kyle Busch's NOS Energy car from 2016, that was okay, well, everybody's old enough to remember that. It's not too much of a throwback year. I think you have to get a little bit removed, probably at least a good 15 to 20 years, unless it's a driver that's been around for a long time, throwing it back to himself or whatever. I think that might be a little bit different. But I just think the position that we're in now, I think we saw like, I don't know if it was 19 teams didn't do it or 19 teams did. I think there were 37 starters. So it, give or take one, either way, about half the field in the Cup Series not participating in the weekend. If you can't even get half the field to do it, or can only get half the field to do it, to me, it's kind of like, why even bother? Because I think the second year we did in 2016, everybody was excited about it. It was this new thing. And I think Brian Scott's 44 car was like the only car in the field that wasn't throwing it back to something, or wasn't, some teams like maybe had their sponsors, even if it wasn't a throwback scheme, it was, the company's old logo or something like that. Like Jamie McMurray had that Mac Tonight car that was very good. So again, I just think that you've been doing this for a decade now. We all know the most famous schemes that are really popular to throw back to, and some teams still do a good job with it. I think the Xfinity sponsors, maybe corporations that are a little bit smaller, want that kind of press, or are more willing to bend their colors or their logos or their font or whatever to fit the throwbacks. But at least in the Cup Series, I think Tanner did a good job last night differentiating the two series, because I think we're at different points with both of them. But in the Cup Series, at least, I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world if we said, let's put this on hold for 5 to maybe even 10 years and then bring it back. I think you'd have fans patiently waiting for the return of a special weekend like this. And maybe, again, there's the idea that if you have too much of something, it's going to get stale. I think that's kind of what we've seen with the throwbacks at this point now in 2025.
Yeah, might be willing to compromise a little bit there, maybe a 5-year gap or maybe a 10-year gap. But I'm also willing to contend that some of these schemes we think are new, or not that old, for a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old at the track, they've never seen it before. And like for some of these schemes, like the winning Brandon Jones, Matt Kenseth throwback, I mean, that we just have to accept the fact that we're old, and this is a throwback for a younger kid.
Yeah, well, but again, even like, I know people were saying like Home Depot should have come back, because Matt had that orange on the bumper still in 2013 or whatever. What year was. So I mean, again, and Menards being yellow, I guess that it's the perfect, like, that just happened to work out, and it's the same number and the same team. But yeah, when you're only throwing it back to me being old enough, and I still feel like I'm a relatively young fan, even though I have been watching the sport for almost 2 decades now. I'm still only 25 years old. Like, I'm old enough to vividly remember when these schemes were new, and remember a time for a good 5 to 6 years before these schemes were introduced. Then it's just kind of like, okay, how far are we really throwing it back here? But again, and I'm glad Joe brought this up in the chat as well. Again, this goes back to the Cup Series versus Xfinity Series. If you can't even get the number placement right, then how much of a throwback is it really? Because you put the teams in a box here with a number placement, and people have brought up the lack of contingencies and how maybe that's why we move the numbers, because it feels like there's a lot of empty space there. But I mean, again, what is the harm in moving it back for just one weekend here? Again, and Brandon, I know we have this debate on last year's show. I still said let the teams choose, and I think that was something that came up on Twitter this weekend as well. I know you said you would rather be uniform across the board no matter what the position is, but
yeah, that's what the teams wanted in the first place. They all wanted consistency.
They wanted consistency, and I get that. I understand that. But, and again, to your point about it not being mandatory, I guess if you want consistent number placement, it would kind of make it, because even the designers that wouldn't do a throwback scheme, they would have to, for one weekend only, change their standard scheme around a little bit, and who knows how easy or difficult that would be to do for them. I don't know. I think it's probably not going to change. It's probably still going to be around. And even in theory, I don't know if you said like, okay, we're doing away with official throwback weekend, I guess the teams would still, I don't know if you can forbid a team from
stop
doing
them.
That necessarily. You might not be. You might have just opened this can of worms up. You might not be able to stop it even if you wanted to at this point. But I mean, again, when it is still an official thing and you only get half the Cup Series field participating, it feels like maybe it's run its course a little bit naturally in that case. And again, I wish we could go back, because I remember, the first 2 years we did this, 2015, 2017, like this felt like a really special weekend here. And I don't know if that goes partly back to my philosophy of only wanting to see, no matter what the track is, only wanting to see the Cup Series there one time a year. And now, we have our throwback race in the spring, and then we have the Southern 500 either in the playoffs or right before the playoffs is like the cutoff race. And, I get, again, I think if any track can host 2 races, maybe Darlington is special enough to justify that. But I don't know. I feel like at the same time, the throwback theme fit the Southern 500 very well. It's a very race that's very important in NASCAR's historical context. So it makes sense to bring the history of our sport back out for that weekend. So again, there's a lot of thought that goes into this weekend and where it is currently in this sport. But I am sympathetic at the very least to the people that say, yeah, it's just it's not as special as it used to be here. We've used up so many good schemes, and when you're getting so many people that aren't participating anyway, then it's kind of like, what's the point?
Yeah. I mean, on the same token, we are year by year slowly making new schemes that will eventually become throwback eligible, depending on where you think that interval of time is. Also, a couple of other things. Don't move the throwback weekend to a different event. I see Bristol Motor Speedway already toting the Food City 500 as a back. They're trying to bill it as a throwback. It feels like a little bit. But I wouldn't move the throwback scheme weekend to any other event. Don't move it to Bristol. Don't move it to North Wilkesboro. Don't move to the All-Star race like Wilkesboro. Leave it alone. It needs to be at Darlington. And also another thing against Throwback Weekend that I've been seeing floating around was also just the turnaround time for designers just in April and after Daytona, just the deadline to get that wrap ready for Throwback Weekend at the first weekend of April is a little short of a turnaround time for some designers, I suppose. So just some things that's been floating around my mind this week as we've been thinking about this topic.
Yeah, I mean, I think Matthew was even saying that on Wrap Up yesterday as well. Just for the designer's sake, maybe it would be better if it was a little bit later in the season here. But
I like my Southern 500 with their current schemes. So that's just me. I don't want. Yeah, I like having what their current look is for the Crown Jewel race.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But again, and even like you said, even some of the teams, like I think Chase Elliott was the butt of a lot of jokes this weekend with their quote unquote throwback. Like I think it reminded me of the Kyle Larson DC Solar Davey Allison throwback from whenever that was 2018. But
yeah, I guess they tried their best, did they?
Yeah, but I mean, if your sponsors aren't willing to bend, their colors or whatever, and it's like only throwing it back to the design. I mean, at that point, then I'd rather you do like what RCR did 2 years ago when they were like, we're throwing it back 4 months or whatever to Kyle Busch's first win with RCR, that was at the Auto Club in February. Like, yeah, okay, like as much as I'm like, okay, you're being a bit of a party pooper there by not, having a throwback scheme. At least you're having some fun with, laughing at yourselves for not doing it. Like I would quite frankly take that over a scheme that like you're trying to pass off as a throwback, but. Like, and this is my thing. If you can't tell immediately what scheme you're throwing it back to, if it requires an explanation,
don't even watch. Don't even bother.
We're not gonna go to the don't even watch argument there. But I think don't even bother. Yeah, don't like. There was, I think it was 2019. Kurt Busch threw it back to his personal car, like it was a 1960s Chevy with like the stripes down or something, like when he was with Ganassi. And I was like, okay, I get it, but like. And Eric Jones threw it back to his late model from, his teenage years. Like, I mean, there's stories. There's stories. I get their personal stories and connections, but I think that's something that like the popular throwbacks, the ones that are the most eye popping and captivating, are the ones that everybody knows and loves. That you can say like, wow, this team really went all in. They got every detail right. And then if you're even fortunate enough to bring back the original sponsors, even and again, like what we saw with Gibbs this weekend. Of course, we'll get into Brandon Jones in just a moment, but. When the numbers and teams and everything match up, like you can say that is the perfect throwback. And I understand it's not always possible in every scenario, but again, like with Universe this weekend, I'm sorry, I'm going to pick on you guys because that was easily, I think, the weakest of the 4 Hendrick schemes. I think Hendrick otherwise did a decent job. But again, even William Byron had a fantastic run, but throwing it back to Jeff Gordon's last race, that wasn't even 10 years ago. Right? Like, that was a special scheme for Jeff. That's like fresh in the minds of everybody. And it's like I get that you want to honor your legends, but I don't know. I mean,
It was 10 years ago.
I know.
You said it though. It was a decade ago. I mean, what at what point do we make it throwback eligible?
It'll be a decade. It's not yet. It'll be a decade in November because it was the last race.
My mistake.
Almost 10 years ago. Close enough. But again, I guess the counter to that is, well, we've seen the Rainbow Warrior scheme. We've seen the Flames, plenty of times already. So again, you kind of run out of ideas there. But I'll give Hendrick credit from this perspective. I think that if they had the weakest, they also had the strongest with Kyle Larson. The Terry Labonte throwback, I thought, for the second year in a row was very, very good. It would have been better if a number was in the center of a door. But we won't beat that dead horse too much for it. Go ahead.
Yeah, they're consistently good. I will say it is there's something to be said for when the most popular driver is one of the loudest ones that's against the Throwback Weekend, but your polls on social media still are overwhelmingly positive for Throwback Weekend. I mean, that's your best efforts. If you get your most popular driver to say nah, and he's the one that probably has the worst throwback attempt.
That's another good point. Like if even the drivers are saying though, like,
but the fans aren't. The fans are the other way.
Yeah,
I think Jeff Gluck's poll. I don't know if it was a Gluck poll or not, but it was like 80-20, 80-10. Yeah, something crazy.
Yeah. Again, I don't think anything's going to change. I'm just saying the weekend doesn't excite me as much as it used to, and there are a lot of things in this, like our championship battles, of course, don't excite me as much as they used to. But I think there are reasons for that, and if you listen to this show, you know what those are. I don't. Again, I'm trying to talk about what I think the reasons are here, as we open this show up, but I don't know. It doesn't feel as exciting and as nostalgic as it used to be, and I think there's a whole variety of reasons we can try to figure out why that might be the case there. But I think a lot of fans, the apathy is setting in, unfortunately. All right, 2 more comments from Joe, and then we'll move on. I think Darlington should keep the Throwback Weekend, but mainly for track festivities, not so much a throwback race. And I don't know, Brandon. I mean, I guess I'll give you this. I mean, you were there seeing the schemes in person, especially in the Xfinity garage. I mean, I guess that's something to take into consideration too. If the track itself is, making you feel immersed in that throwback experience, and I guess there's something to be said for that as well here. I remember when Richard Petty got in one of his old cars and they had to black flag him because he wouldn't get off the track for the opening pace lap. Like, yeah. I mean, yeah, those things I think helps make the weekend feel special. And unfortunately, Ken Squire is no longer with us, but him going back into the NBC booth, to call stage 2 with Ned Jarrett and everything. Yeah, that's when everybody goes all in. I think you get a great product. When it's kind of like, some teams are doing it, some people aren't. It again, I think it kind of takes away from that experience. And Joe also says similar to how sports teams would have themed games for the fans. Yeah, I mean, and again, that's something. I mean, not to get too much into a stick and ball sport comparison here, but I know, I see the post like once a month scrolling through my Instagram feed, like everybody talking about how the new NBA teams' logos compared to what they were in the 2000s, like almost every single one of them is a downgrade.
Simplified.
Wouldn't it be great to, have a throwback night in the NBA, maybe, if there was a night where all 30 teams were playing and they brought back retro jerseys or something. But,
they have like anniversary years, they'll throw back for an entire season,
Sure. Yeah, if you're going to do it, I think you have to go all in on it. Make sure every team participates and everybody, is part of the celebration and no fan base feels left out. I think that's what you have to do to make it a success.
And for your fan base, I feel like the 76ers are like basically a throwback already, like all the time with the red, white, and blue. Yeah. I still think of them as the gold, red, and blue, the 2000s. Yeah.
Yeah. They're teasing they might bring back the black Iverson era jerseys next year, and I don't know. Right now we're throwing it back to the process years, except we weren't actually trying to lose this season.
Steady.
Yeah. Don't get me started here. Don't get Kobe or good to see you in the chat, Kobe. Don't get him started on the Charlotte Bobcats.
Rest in peace, Charlotte Bobcats.
I think that's an era that, well, but again, for Charlotte, I guess maybe you don't throw it back to the mid 2000s, but yeah, bring back the 90s Hornets jerseys back out. That would be. Don't put. I don't know, but you need to necessarily put the teams in a 5-year box, but maybe say like, we're gonna choose a specific decade and go all in on that. That would give like throw it back to a scheme from from the 90s, for example, or from the 80s or whatever. If you put it on hold for 5 years and, then I think the 2000s is far enough removed that, you could do that or something. If there's a theme, I think that would help as well.